Okay, so I think I'll start with introductions. Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Laura Sandino. I'm going to be co-moderating today's event. I'm going to be doing the opening and the closing, as well as looking at any questions coming in from the audience. Luis Scumerini will be my co-moderator, and he's going to be leading the discussion. So thank you all for coming to today's webinar on the 2023 presidential elections in Argentina. Today we are co-hosted by the Chicago Center on Democracy, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Stigler Center for the Study of the Economy and the State. So before we begin, I would like to encourage the audience to participate by asking questions throughout the discussion. To do that, please type a question in the Q&A box at any time during the talk. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Chicago Center on Democracy's website. So before we get into introductions, I want to address that we do have a gender imbalance in the panel, which is something that the organizers have tried to avoid and will be more conscientious of in the future. So nonetheless, it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, we have Fernando Alvarez, the Charles F. Gray Distinguished Service Professor in the University of Chicago Economics Department and the college. Then we have Francisco Buera, Professor of Economics and Associate Chair of Economics at Washington University in St. Louis. We have Luis Martinez, Assistant Professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. And last but not least, Sebastián Galiani, the Manker Olson Professor of Economics and at the University of Maryland, and former Treasury Deputy Minister in Argentina from 2017 to 2018. So now I would like to open up the discussion, and Luis, if you would like to introduce yourself and start off with any questions.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this great and exciting and also timely event. My name is Luis Scumerini. I'm an assistant professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. And well, I want to just introduce a bit the conversation before starting to ask some questions to our great panelists. So Argentina has a new president, Javier Milei from La Libertad Avanza, or Freedom Moves Forward. He took office yesterday. It would be really hard to overstate the magnitude of this change for Argentine politics. Who is Javier Milei? Perhaps his most defining feature is that he's a true political outsider in a country known for insider politics. His political career started a little over 2 years ago when he was elected to represent the city of Buenos Aires in Argentine Congress at the national level. But he entered politics after he became a TV celebrity. He quickly developed a fandom based on his calls to rally against La Casta or the caste, which is a derogatory term that he uses to describe politicians and crony capitalists, union leaders, social movements that, in his view, submerge Argentina in a century of decadence. Or decay, not decadence. That's a bad translation from Spanish. So Milei's style is unambiguously divisive. Since the beginning, he used insults and improprieties to chastise his political opponents, terms such as communist, filth, or crooks. He includes not only the political left, but also the political right, people such as his incoming security secretary or even the Pope. So without a doubt, Milei has the elements of a textbook populist. Like other populists before him, he poses a contrast between a corrupt political elite, La Casta, and the pure people. And this style was very much on display yesterday when he decided, against the norm, not to address Congress and its members and even Supreme Court justices, but to actually stand on the stairs of Congress and address the people, his back to politicians. Now, his brand of populism is not exactly the one that is typically associated with known leaders such as Bolsonaro, Trump, or Viktor Orban, or even Chavez. He's a libertarian economist. Trained in the Austrian School of Economics, he advocates for radical free market policies in every arena, from foreign trade and fiscal policy to organ donations and weapons. However, in Argentina at the moment, radical neoliberalism is and populism seem to be having an elective affinity. Milei's recipes gain enthusiastic support after Argentina has had over a decade of economic crisis, recession, extremely high inflation. That's why he won a landslide based on a coalition that encompasses not only middle and upper middle class people, but also popular sectors, both in Buenos Aires and in the rest of the country. So Milei is a populist who wants to rectify the injustice against the people by radical economic reform. Will he succeed? Well, today we have a great panel of renowned scholars to help answer this question. Not only do we have specialists on the topics we're going to be talking about, but also some have great policy and governmental experience. So let's start by talking about the economic context, right? To characterize the economy that Milei inherits as challenging would be a radical understatement. He has to deal with extremely high, though not yet hyperinflation, although yesterday he tried to say that what we're having right now is hyperinflation. Maybe we can hear opinions on this today. Over 45% poverty, an extremely high fiscal deficit, negative foreign reserves in the central bank, an energy crisis. This is an exceptionally challenging situation. So my first question to the panelists is, what do you see are the main challenges going forward for Argentina, and what is your forecast for economic performance for the near and medium term in the country? Whoever wants to go first, you can go, or you can raise your hand.
I can start. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to visit the University of Chicago, even virtually. Well, he faced many challenges, but I don't want to not start by saying that any times that the populist left is defeated, there is hope in Argentina. Okay, there is hope. We'll see how it's played out. The main challenge he faces is that on the one hand, he has to adjust a large fiscal deficit in a very fragile social situation where the deficit itself is very large, although there's been a large adjustment already going on in the last couple of years. So that puts more of a limit of what he can adjust, right? For example, if you think about pensions, well, pensions in real terms have adjusted more than 2 points of GDP in the last 6 years. Yeah, they can adjust more, but it's not starting from what we used to have when I served under Macri's government. That was an expenditure on pensions that was above our level of GDP. Now it's well aligned or even below the curve, right? So and I'm using that as an example that the economy has been adjusting wages, pensions, and other things, and still there is a fiscal deficit that is unsustainable, right? And the fact that Milei was elected didn't change this. If you look today at the country risk, is about 2,000 points. When Macri was elected, it was 600 points, right? The interest rate is very high, and so on. So he has to make a fiscal adjustment because he has a mandate to stabilize the economy. That's what he promised, and that's what he has to deliver. Now, he has to do that, not only in a country that had run this fiscal deficit one way or another for more than 70 years, but also, and not only in this difficult social situation, but also with a political coalition that is yet unfolding, right? He himself has not the power to do it, in the sense that he has less than 20% of the congressmen and less than 10% of the senators. So he made, logically, a coalition in the runoff election with the candidate that was third, which was the candidate from the Macri coalition. But even having those votes is not enough to pass important reforms. So I think he very pragmatically, so far in my view, very smart. He appointed a minister of interior the guy that's gonna think the politics with Congress, which has a lot of political experience and was with Cavallo in the 90s, so which was basically the Peronist government that did reform before, but also was part of Scioli's government in the province of Buenos Aires. So he's trying to align that part of the Peronists that is not the radical left ideological that will never support him. The other part of the Peronists with whom Macri also negotiated all the times. We were not as weak as he is in Congress, but we didn't have majority in any of the chambers, and we still bargain in the Senate and in the lower house reforms. So you can bargain with the Peronists too, but it's not free. So we'll see how he plays his cards.
Thank you. That was great. Anyone else wants to chime in to talk about the economic environment?
I guess I was maybe I can share a few slides with a few figures, but I think it's also useful to complement what Sebastian correctly characterized. We're having a little bit of a longer term perspective on how we get where we are.
That would be great.
Can I do? Let's see. Am I sharing this? No.
Perfect.
Perfect. And I guess I'm only sharing one. So let me see. Yeah. I guess we try I get through today. Not now. I would like to make 3 points. So let me just only focus now on the historical part. When you think about economic history of the last 50 years, it's fair to say that Argentina has been in a long period of what we can call secular stagnation. And one way to measure that is to think of an average growth of a developed country. That's kind of roughly in the post-war period goes at 2% per year, and Argentina was growing at that rate, say through the up to the middle of the early part of the 70s, and then there is a long decoupling. So Argentina is going from being a country that used to be 70% of US per capita GDP to a country that is now a third of US per capita GDP. And that went through, that process went through a lot of political transitions. So I kind of, in this figure, I try to highlight. Those transitions are going from early on in that period, went from democratic to non-democratic governments. So there you have the gray areas will be military governments. The blue areas will be Peronist governments. And the red one will be non-Peronist governments. That used to be Partido Radical. More recently, it's going to be coalitions or non-Peronist parties. And those transitions are associated with oftentimes with economic crisis. Some of those transitions happen before the end of the term. That's going to be the two non-Peronist government before the last one, and the last one was a term. And those are going to be associated with often with endemic inflation, except for a very short period in the 90s. And when you look at the data, those endemic inflation has to do with a recurrent lack of fiscal consistencies.
Paco,
yeah,
can you go back and point out for the audience the axis of inflation?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't. I meant to give you an answer to the question, but also when I'm struggling not to make a presentation. I don't want to take too much time. I feel a little bit self-conscious. But the axis here, this will be log scales. So 10 will be 10% yearly rate. 1 will be a number that if you are from the US, you should be more familiar with. Now we're very concerned because we happen to be close to something like 6-7%. It was a big deal. Now we're going back to 2%. So you are in the US, you're barely going to see things happening in this axis. 10 will be 10% per year, 100%, 1,000%, 10,000%. I guess the top one is, don't look at it because it's a little bit unfair. That would be 100,000%. And you have in this figure 3 hyperinflation, one in the early 70s, one in the mid 80s, one at the end of the 80s, early 90s. You're gonna have another spike that happened after the 2001 crisis when Argentina leave the currency boards in a huge political crisis that related to the resignation of the then president under a non-permanent coalition, and a spike of inflation that was contained. And after that, we went through 2 decades, more than 2 decades of increasing inflation over time until we're at a current situation with having monthly inflation rate above the 200%. When you look, I mean, inflation in many ways is like flu, so it's not necessarily the main problem of Argentina, but it's an obvious symptoms. I mean, the cause of that has to do with a recurrent lack of fiscal consistency. And that went, again, through many governments, both military governments, non-Peronist government, with some exception of the 90s, also through Peronist government. And it's true that the Macri government, where Sebastián was part, was making a large effort to revert this, but it's fair to say that the last couple of years things keep on going out of control. So that's to give you the sense of, so why Milei? Now will be Milei is a reflection of secular decline plus endemic instability. The situation is bad, but the secular situation is bad, and the problem not being able as a country to arrive at a consistent fiscal policy. So a consistent policy more generally is a problem. So Argentina has been characterized and is still characterized as a movement, a pendular movement of policies, from interventionism to pro-market interventions again. And now the question is, we're going to get pro-market, and part of the hope is fiscal austerity or consistency. And also this is happening in an environment with declining institutional quality. In the case of the previous Peronist government, I would say the lower independence of judiciary with a prime problem. So when I say that the problem is not so, there are problems in the short run that are important, but I think there are more critical, important problems in the medium term. And I think, going back to the introduction of Luis, that there was a very good introduction. I will say that if Milei is successful, I guess that was it's not about making extreme economic policies. Milei will be extremely successful if Argentina get to move closely to what will be OECD style of economic arrangements of economic institutions, an arrangement that is be similar to the one that a lot of our neighbors currently have, like Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and they're both socialist and more right-wing countries. So I guess I would say that the problems are not so much about the very short run. The problems about being able to get agreements in the medium term. Let me stop there.
Does anyone want to say anything else about this, or we can move on as well?
I could briefly comment on it. So one thing in my view, what is hopeful about Milei is that perhaps, there was never like a politician with a chance of winning, and he actually has been, he is the president now, in which the platform was basically one in which wanted to get the fiscal situation under control. So, I mean, he actually campaigned based on that. This is totally unheard. This is very different from, Sebastián could tell us more about it, but this is very different from, certainly from the campaign from Macri, this was kind of hidden. It may have been actually what the administration wanted to do and knew that it needed to be done, but it wasn't really what kind of was being campaigned for, nor what the electorate probably wanted to hear. So, and not only that, but also his kind of general outlay in terms of, public policy. He's a very weird candidate. People will ask him questions. That's why I'm not sure if I would classify him as a populist. People will ask him questions during the campaign, like maybe 2 days before the campaign. Do you want to condone debts from people that have debts indexed to inflation? You could imagine what will happen in the US. We will spend a huge amount of money basically bailing out people that have student debt. He says, no. They knew what we're getting, we are not doing this. And like this example, there are many. Clearly, this is a very different electoral calculus. So the one thing I want to say is that it's really in that dimension, a breath of fresh air. Because, if you think about populism, someone is trying to, kind of make promises that, kind of getting votes is very strange. He's not doing none of this. I mean, he's just saying no. I mean, this is during the campaign, it's not after. During the campaign, he's just campaigning in, no, we shouldn't do that. He's campaigning against the idea that every time that there is a need, then there is a right. He actually opposed to that. So I don't know. So whether we call it a populist, he's certainly like not a conventional politician. He has all this weird both personality and alliances with strange, to me, Anyway, so that the first thing is that there's a bit of hope because he campaigned in a way that he will be doing something. Then there's the obvious things that make it very, very tough that he will be successful. One of the things is what Sebastián very clearly outlined, and I think it's very clear that there's very little, it's a new party that has only part of political support. There's something that I think Sebastián knows a lot about this, and I have learned a lot from Sebastián on this, so probably he should be the one talking about this one too, is that one thing is very important, and I think underrated, is to have a large team of people that know about a lot of questions to run an administration. So I think the last time, as I know, I really think extremely highly of Sebastián, and I think extremely highly of many people during the Macri administration. But even then, that they have a foundation and they prepare themselves, they probably didn't have like a large group of people. Probably the last time that this happened was during the Cavallo administration, the first time that Cavallo was in the government. I think Sebastián should talk about this because he thought a lot about this and he has first-hand experience, but I believe he will agree. So in the case of Milei, it's just him, I would say, and very few people. So that's another challenge. And this is a very big challenge because, he just appoints people that, it's we could have a lot of doubts whether they will be able to do the type of stabilization plan that I believe that they need. I believe that by the midterm elections, they actually have to have inflation under control. I believe that this idea that they could go through stagflation from 2 years and that will be political support is very unlikely. Either it's a very smart movement from Milei to downgrade expectations, or it's just totally reading it incorrectly. But I will be very interested also in Sebastián's view on that because he will know much more than me on that.
So we can. Oh yeah, go ahead, Sebastián. Yes, go ahead.
No, thank you, Fernando. You're always very nice to me. So I think I agree. Yes, you need a team. Kissinger that passed away notes also a lot, and he used to say, policy is based on knowledge, but its conduct is also an art, and I think you need both. And I think the team, he put a team, an initial team, but he needs a much larger team. I agree with Fernando. And now we are trying to decipher whether he is a really good artist in the art of politics, right? We don't know. Fernando gave a very good example, right? Are you really expecting that you can go with very high inflation and stagnation 2 years? I think if the answer is yes, he will not succeed. But I don't think he's expected that. I think he's sort of playing a game at which he showed to be a master, which is the game of the social media, a game I have no idea how to play, and clearly the candidate that I supported, Patricia, didn't know it how to play it either, right? And so he goes and say, "Oh no, they left strictly. They left with a very high inflation. If you extrapolate where they left, it's more than 300%. Well, he said it's 15,000%. He measured the deficit of the central bank, which is nominal, as if it were equivalent to the real deficit, right? Which clearly they are not. If you eliminate the fiscal deficit, the real fiscal deficit, the quasi fiscal deficit will collapse immediately, while if you eliminate the quasi-fiscal, the real is still there waiting for you to do the job. So, but I think he does not understand these things? No, I think he understands. It's just he's playing this game. He's saying, okay, I have a 15% deficit, and then in a year, he will say, I reduce it to 6. No one reduce it 8 points in a year. That's the way he will gonna play. So I think we have to monitor his government day by day. This may sound contrary to what Paco say, but then I will agree with him if you give me 2 more minutes. In what sense? I think he's expected that at this moment, inflation, no matter what he do, at the beginning, inflation was going to go up. He has to adjust many prices, and especially the exchange rate and several other prices. So he said, well, I'm going to blame them. They left 15,000% inflation. I'm going to have more than 100. I don't want to have it. I'm going to blame them. But we don't know, and Fernando is right, what is going to be the stabilization program, right? We know that he wants to achieve fiscal equilibrium, which is a sine qua non condition to stabilize the economy. We all agree on that. Then we can discuss how he's going to achieve, how much he will be able to maneuver in Congress. Because I think let's postpone that, because otherwise I take too much time. But then Paco says something very so the way I think he will succeed is that if he goes step by step, he goes through these first 3-4 months that will be very tough on him because there's going to be recession and there's going to be very high inflation running probably 20% per month. After that, he has to start showing that he's doing the adjustment, and based on the market believing he's doing the adjustment, if then prices start to accommodate to that, like the country risk goes down, the interest rate then goes down, he puts a stabilization program. Which one is that? We don't know, because in the campaign he say, I'm gonna dollarize, and now that's not gonna be the program. So there has to be a team, a very good team, that thinks about all the issues of an stabilization, which are very difficult, because we tend to say when we go to the TV, yeah, if you reduce inflation, of course, if you move from a high inflation to, if you reduce the deficit, we eliminate it. At some point that will happen, but in the middle, there are nominal contracts, there are all sorts of wealth transfers, there are many things you have to take into account, and also you have to have a way for the people to adjust the expectation. And then Paco say, well, if I look at the middle term success of Milei, I think the success is he makes Argentina a normal country, and then he has a doubt. there, because he said he has ideas that go well beyond the normality. And I think that was a very interesting thing in Argentina, that if Milei succeed, then the risk is if he's going to go much further, and if going much further is going to remain an equilibrium, or it's going to open the door to something that is not as good as to staying like Chile, Uruguay, or I think anyway, that's not the problem today. I think that we have to focus on these first 2 years, and what Milei has to do is to reduce substantially the deficit so he can have an stabilization plan, reduce inflation, and win the midterm election. If he wins the midterm election, then he can pass better and more important reforms, and the same if he gets reelected. And that's what success and the art of politics is.
Can I comment on some of those things real quick? Yeah, so I think I tend to agree with the other panelists that there's clearly a need to adjust. Like you look at those figures that Paco was showing early on, and there's not much disagreement there. I guess there's 3 questions that kind of shape the discussion. One is, if you're going to do the fiscal adjustment, where exactly is it going to come from? The second is when, the timing is going to be important. And the third key question is how, and there the politics come into the center stage. So let me say a couple of things about each. I was looking at the newspapers this morning based on, I think, like the cabinet meeting that they held this morning or something. And what they seemed to suggest was that the initial focus of their attention is going to be public employment. And I was looking at some quick numbers, and maybe my co-panelists can say if these numbers are crazy or not, but these figures suggested that in Argentina, something like 18 to 20% of the workforce is in the public sector. So like 1 out of 5. And those sources that I was looking at suggested that other big economies in the region, like Peru, Brazil, Mexico, are more around 8 to 12, say 10%. So that certainly suggests that the public sector in Argentina is huge compared to its peers, and that there's room to maybe, trim some fat. But there it gets interesting because, on the one hand, I have done some work on austerity of local governments in Colombia, and that seems to work relatively well. And there's interesting studies in political science that use surveys to try to get a sense of people's preferences over austerity. And it does seem to be the case that voters like austerity when it's about like administrative overhead and bureaucracy and things like that, not so much when it's about welfare programs and social services and so on. So for instance, Timo Fetzer has this very interesting paper showing that the austerity of the Conservatives in the UK plausibly contributed to the rise of, Brexit and populist parties and so on. So it's interesting. So the first thing I would point out is it seems like the adjustment early on will focus on these operating expenses and bureaucracy. But there it's tricky because on the one hand, there's reasons to think, well, maybe these cuts are the type of thing that can work with voters. But at the same time, there could be like these general equilibrium political effects where if 1 out of every 5 workers is a public employee, and you start getting rid of all of these people are going to be unhappy, and that could be a sizable share of the electorate. And that's where the second question about the when becomes important, because as one of my co-panelists was pointing out, I believe that there's midterm elections in 2025, which is just around the corner. And so almost the key question is, can Milei get through those elections and gain some breathing room to then maybe implement a more ambitious agenda? So, my somewhat pessimistic view is any type of adjustment will come in at a high cost in the short run, and that high cost in the short run may easily prove more than enough to derail the Milei presidency. And then the third question is the how. So you have to get these things through Congress, through the political process. My sense, and I don't know, my co-panelists can tell me if I'm crazy here, is that in Argentina, there seems to be an important gradient that drives politics, has to do between this core that is kind of the Buenos Aires region, like the big economic engine, and then what you could call kind of the geographic periphery. And so I was looking at a map of the electoral results, and it struck me that the places where Massa did relatively better and actually won were all kind of more in these frontier regions, like in the north, maybe near Bolivia, in the west, and so on. And my sense from the little that I know of the electoral system is that there's some degree of malapportionment, such that these regions, even though economically they're not so powerful, politically they are quite powerful. And I was looking, I believe the president of Congress is this guy Menem, who is the nephew of the former president Menem, who was not from Buenos Aires, but like from La Rioja, from some other province outside. And so my sense is there's like these established political interests that are outside Buenos Aires, that are associated with the old school Peronist ways, and that these people don't have a lot of interest in the type of reform that Milei will want to push through, which may, you know, compromise their traditional privileges and interests. So whether anything can happen there is certainly unclear at this time.
Well, thank you, everyone. You have addressed a lot of the things that I wanted to ask about and pack them, so I'm going to try to reorganize the conversation a bit. But this is fascinating. I really like what Paco said about what it means to be successful, right? And how, but what to me seems to be a tension in Milei's platform and his challenge right now is that a lot of his popular policies, at least the ones that people seem to be liking in the abstract, don't address the problems that you're talking about, right? Market reforms, very ambitious ones. He cannot do them now, and they wouldn't solve the problems that we have right now. He hasn't, as Sebastian said, he hasn't been explicit about a stabilization plan at all. Many people say that Toto Caputo, the new Minister of the Economy, is kind of a debt minister, finance minister. I will solve the issue of the LELIQs without actually addressing this issue. So Milei was elected on this platform that seems to be very interesting. The abstract dollarization was an item that seems to have been removed for now, although people seem to like it. But actually what he has to do now to deliver was not on the platform. So I guess I have two sets of questions. One, if you would like to say something about the stabilization program, and the design of it, right? Because one thing we know about stabilization programs is that the sequencing matters a bit, and this is something that Sebastian already alluded to. If early on you only have costs and concentrated costs on people who voted for them, he may actually lose popularity very quickly. And at the same time, his coalition is very, very diverse. He matched Peronism in its core in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires and defeated it in the interior provinces, something that nobody anticipated. So I'm curious about what do you think the economic viability of his plan as far as the stabilization plan is, and whether he can actually carry it out politically.
So I could try to take a stab at that. So the stabilization plan. So, you know, we should think a little bit different from stabilization plans in the US when we are thinking about inflation of like, say, 8%, and then bringing down this to like back to 3%. Maybe we'll be successful to 2%. Maybe we won't even try. So at this level of inflation rates, I think that most of the empirical evidence that we have from stabilization plans is that they are expansive. So they are not actually contractionary. I mean, it depends a little bit on how they are designed, but the ones that are actually successful are actually expansive. So if you look at the history of Argentina, but it's not only Argentina. So, and they're all very similar. They have some degree of fixed exchange rate, and then they bring down inflation very fast, and they're expansionary. Many of them they're coming after a short period of corrections, like the ones that are being anticipated. So that's why, for me, the idea that he's going to do a stabilization plan like whatever we went through now in the last year and a half, in the US, just not, and this talk about variable lags, which is sort of something about, doing like a kind of an interest rate base or money based stabilization plan at this level of inflation. So there's almost unheard of and not successful, and it's kind of puzzling. So I expect that what it will be is that, I mean, if it's going to be successful, it will have the most you can. Of course, you need research for that. So how we're going to, but the most likely successful plan will be some sort of something kind of more of a fixed exchange rate plan. And empirically, historically, they're all been actually expansive. So that will take care of the midterm elections, and also may open the possibility to do other reforms. So that's one thing. And then the other question is like, how do I expect? And I guess Paco actually also knows a lot about fiscal policy. He wrote like important papers on the history of fiscal policy, and so does Sebastian. But the way I expect on my, I'm more an amateur in this part, to say the least, is that he may not be able to have the reforms that he wants to. He's going to use the budget from last year that is set in nominal terms, and then he will do cuts in whatever he wants. So, at this level of inflation, if inflation goes 20% for 3 months, and you're using the budget of last year because his budget is not approved, then essentially he's in large parts of the budget, he's going to decide it, kind of unilaterally. Now, it could be very, very contentious, but it's something that we shouldn't really think that it could really happen. I give large chances that it will happen.
So I wanted to bring up, I know you have all mentioned how Milei has gone on and kind of is not doing the dollarization as he kind of ran with the platform. We have some questions from the audience who are asking if the dollarization was in any way feasible at all. What are the implications of dollarization if that had gotten approved, or if it is approved? And we have another question asking if the government couldn't go long with stagnation and high inflation, how could this be addressed in a shorter term? So if anyone wants to just quickly answer those.
Yeah, if you want, I can try it. I think dollarization was not feasible in the short run. You need to resolve the problem of fiscal deficit. You have to clean the central bank balance sheet, and you have to have dollars. And they tried. They had a plan. They didn't got the dollars, and they abandoned. Actually, there was a person appointed to be the president of the central bank with that program, and at some point they figured that they couldn't do it. So that's the answer. And I think in the long term, whether Milei will insist with his idea or not is what Paco referred to. Well, in the long term, there is these challenges that I mentioned. To some extent, it's interesting because if he's very successful, those challenges may have even larger chance of happen. But it's a problem to figure later, right? So not now. But then the third part of your question, I totally agree with Fernando. And just to not repeat the same, let's just recall also that when Alfonsín launched the Plan Austral, even if then it was not sustainable, for the 6 months where it reduced inflation before election, it allows Alfonsín to really have a very good win in what will be the midterm election. And when Menem launched convertibility, also was 6 months before the election, and they won the election. So these programs, when you start from inflation that are 20% per month or higher, and you reduce it to even 2% per month, they are super popular. And that's what he has to focus on the first 2 years, is how he gets the sequence of these initial months in which he has to adjust the relative prices, launch a consistent program of stabilization that is consistent with the adjustment he can do given his political situation in Congress. And by the way, we don't want to push him to do the optimal fiscal path. I mean, in what sense? There may be some structural reforms, like a full pension reform. They will be ideal to do in Argentina, but maybe that he doesn't have the political power to do it, like Macri didn't have it, and we stick to just change the formula. That he also has to do it if he wants to reduce inflation. But there's going to be time later. We cannot solve everything in 2 years. Remember Paco's presentation. We have this problem for 70 years. Let's focus on solve them in steps, right? Now it's about having a fiscal path that allows for reducing inflation, win the midterm election, and then moving from there, right? And I think that will be the right approach.
So Sebastian already alluded to this, which is his very low share of seats of both chambers of Congress, right? Less than 10% in the Senate, less than 15% in the lower chamber. Some of the adjustments and policies that he has to adopt to actually get there to the midterms would require non-trivial support. Some not, some can be done by decree, some administrative issues that actually are economically relevant, but not all of them. And in that sense, even though his mandate is wider, he's not Menem in that sense, right? In terms of the political coalitions that he's underpinned his support, and also he's not Macri either. Macri, Sebastian is right, he didn't have massive support, but he at least came from a traditional party, and Milei has shown some considered pragmatism, at least so far, in terms of laying bridges to some elements of Cambiemos and Juntos por el Cambio, how it's called right now, but also even there is some room to bargain with elements of Peronism that seems quite fractured and in lack of leadership right now. But I'm curious where you think that actually that path to the midterms with potentially inflation under control would be politically, I mean, it cannot be smooth, but at least politically manageable. Or do you think that there is room for failure there?
Maybe following what Fernando and Sebastian just said. So with Argentina has a system with a strong power on executive in many ways, especially with a lot of the taxes, an important part of the taxes being discretionary on the executive. I mean, all the export taxes are not automatically distributed to the province, plus the fact that what Fernando said, that the Milei will be able to have a budget from the previous year if his budget is not approved. That will give him significant amount of power to negotiate. On the positive side for him, a lot of the local government provinces now have been moving to what was previously the opposition, the non-Peronist coalition. So that will bring, I will expect, a lot of room for negotiation. On top of that, a lot of economic opportunities, relatively new economic opportunities in Argentina, tend to be more spatially distributed. That's something that is touches to something that Luis just also mentioned. A lot of there's a large shale gas reserve that they've been developed fairly successfully, but it's not fully. It's about to explode. It might be profitable for the next 2 decades. Eventually, there will be a transition away from that. But there's a lot of it's resources for a few provinces in Patagonia. There's a large lithium deposits that also coming online. That happen to be in the northwest of Argentina. So plus there is a lot of more traditionally agriculture very productive state, plus tech, new tech and biotech sector. They also happen to be spread out. I mean by that I mean not necessarily in Buenos Aires or in the capital. So that gives, in my mind, a lot of room for getting agreement. Whether he will be successful or not will depend on how pragmatic and savvy he is. He's shown a lot of pragmatism on my perspective. I mean, actually, I was very much personally upset when he did very well in the primaries. I was kind of upset with friends or people I knew lost by supporting a second. I cannot believe it, what you're supporting. From there to now, he has shown a lot of pragmatism. And there's a lot of room on how you want to interpret dollarization and not, whether Argentina is very dollarized still, whether you're going to give freedom to people to use dollar freely if they want. One can have interpretations of dollarization that goes beyond an strict one. I agree with Fernando, and Sebastián is not feasible now. And if you're successful bringing down the deficits and inflation, there's not much role for that. So at that point wouldn't be a non-issue. But I say I'm sort of hopeful in the fact that in terms of I see room there to have a lot of agreements with the gobernadores. The same way that Macri was, and Sebastián knows very experience with that. Macri was very successful with agreement with, and governors were very happy with their counterparty. My understanding is we were much happier with a counterparty as Macri than with a counterparty as the following Peronism. Not all the provinces. Some provinces, I agree with assessment that would be tend to have be dramatically net receiver resources, but other ones would be more open to agreements.
Plus Milei has a good card in his hand that I think he's playing it well pragmatically, which is that the Massa, which was the Minister of Finance running for president under the populist Kirchnerist coalition, cut income and VAT taxes just before the second round, right? And that is estimated for the whole next year, close to 2 points of GDP, and 55% of that goes to the provinces. So if I were Milei, I will say, because Milei also voted to cut down. So I say, no, I don't believe in increasing the taxes back, as he's saying. I'm not going to increase it back. But he then never say, then the deficit is 7%. We don't have those 2 points, right? He keeps with the deficit as if the cuts are not there. So I think what he's playing is this game. I send the budget, you add back the taxes. I don't veto, but you pass me some of the reforms I need. And that is totally doable with many governors. They care a lot about those resources. They're not that ideological. Some will be ideological, but you never need all of them, right? You never need all of them to pass these laws.
A couple of things that stand out for me. One, which was already mentioned, is the role of the PRO, the Macri coalition as like this pivotal player. I haven't followed events in the last couple of days, but the last time I looked at it, there seemed to be this tension where Macri himself gave his support to Milei, and in return, I believe that Patricia Bullrich, who was the third place candidate from the Macri coalition, she has been appointed security czar or something. So clearly on the Macri side of things seem to be aligned, and that coalition is crucial support. But as far as I understand, this Macri coalition also has this other part, which is this traditional party called UCR, Unión Cívica Radical. And those guys seem to not be so happy with the support that was given. And I remember reading a report where like the head of that party said, our coalition with Macri is over now that they've done this. So, you know, it's not obvious. Certainly you need to count the votes. And I have this rough sense that if you add Milei's small coalition plus the Macri, these third place moderate centrists, that kind of takes you across the line. But you need to have, you know, everyone aligned. And if you have this fundamental tension, then things can easily unravel. And the other thing that I would highlight in that same sense is, you know, I was looking and I believe that this libertarian party that Milei represents was created in 2018. And this Freedom Advances, La Libertad Avanza thing was created 2 years ago. And so you're also in a setting where these party affiliations are extremely fluid and extremely volatile. And so that generates a certain risk insofar as you can imagine that if the adjustment program goes well, and if indeed this leads to some type of boom, then everyone is happy. But on the other hand, as soon as you hit a bit of a storm, you know, it's like the rats jumping off the ship. Like these politicians, you know, these coalitions, it's a house of cards. And so, you know, it strikes me that there's not the institutional backbone that you would want in order to pursue, say, a long-term agenda where you say, okay, we have this long-term movement, we have the, you know, Milei may be gone in 2 or 4 years, but we have a whole party infrastructure that stands for these views. While here it seems to, you know, if things go well, maybe it works out, but it's certainly very fragile, I would emphasize.
So yeah, Fernando, go ahead if you want to. Yeah.
No, please. You are the expert on that.
No, I like to moderate, but my understanding is that Milei's approach so far was trying to build a political coalition in Congress on the cheap, right? Like, so he incorporated Patricia Bullrich in a kind of bilateral manner. There is a lot of debate as to actually what happened. Some people say that Macri is actually pissed at her. For sure, the rest of leadership of Junto por el Cambio is not happy with that. Rogelio Frigerio, who seems to be an incoming leader, and he's just governor now of Entre Rios, seems to be hinting at opposing the Milei government if they don't agree with reforms, and he's tied to, you know, the province, so depends on these resources. So I guess just to frame that, the question I'm going to ask is, as losers of reform start to appear, right? Milei has also been pivoting on what to say out social plans and social movements that depend on these plans. Whether you think that the connections between certain groups of voters that start to feel the costs of reform early on, that gets reflected in Congress and then start to introduce roadblocks to Milei's getting successfully to the midterms. So it's out social movements, it's out also voters and legislators.
So let me, I'm sorry, I'm gonna sound very much like a, you know, same idea one at a time. Basically, if you reduce inflation like a traditional stabilization plan, just the reduction of inflation is gonna be very popular, and that will be expansive, then everybody will jump in. So that, to me, that's the only chance he has. Now, there's the issue of all the other reforms of his own political agenda, which is not clear that they are popular. But if he actually succeeds, I think that he will do well in the midterm elections, and then will be a different game. If he doesn't succeed by the midterm elections, I think that it's very hard to know what's going to happen.
Can I interject there? Sorry, you said that. I thought it was a very interesting and original idea, and so I want to follow up on that. Would you say a little bit more about what an expansive stabilization plan looks like concretely, what kind of policies, what kind of effects? Because this is something that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, this is, there's kind of a literature in Latin America. See, what happened is that I'm old, and well, I had to say, soy Sebastián, he looks younger, but so he is. You know, like in the time in which there was a lot of inflation in Latin America and in other parts of the world, like Israel, and then, you know, this was kind of common, that coming from high inflation and even very, very high inflation, like in the interwar, going by the word for Sargent, and actually Paco wrote some chapters in a book about experiences in Latin America. He wrote a chapter together with, I think that's where his slides are coming from the chapter in this book that he wrote with Tom Sargent and other ones, across the history of fiscal and monetary policy in Latin America. So coming back to this, at the time when inflation was high, there were many of these stabilization plans. Now, except Argentina and now Venezuela, this is in the past for Latin America. But there are all these experiences when there was the sort of conquest of Latin American inflation that happened, by the late 90s, in which there were all these stabilization plans. We could talk about the feature of them, but these stabilization plans are, in a kind of fast way, reduce inflation, and they stay there permanently. And when there was this reduction of inflation, they were all expansionary, meaning that unemployment went down, output went up. So very different from this idea that, we have been trained, say, or maybe economists, like in the US, saying, well, a stabilization plan will be something you raise interest rate and you create a recession. This is the opposite what happened in all the stabilization plans. That's what Sebastian was explaining about the Austral plan by 85 or so in Argentina. It was the same with the Krieger-Bacena plan. Anyway, we could talk about, Paco actually is also an expert on the history of all these plans, but we could talk about what happened in Uruguay, talk about what happened in Chile, we could talk about what happened in Bolivia. So this is, because it's sort of like, coming down from very high inflation rates is a bit of a different business of, going from 8 to 2, as opposed to coming from 150 to 10. And, there is the idea that there is a type of stabilization plan that is actually reduces inflation fast, and it is expansive. Activity grows, unemployment comes down. So that's why, and it does it in a fast way, as Sebastian was saying, with convertibility and with, as an example from Argentina, and with the Austral plan, they had different designs, some differences, and they lasted different amount, these two, but initially both of them were expansive, meaning output went up, unemployment came down, employment went up, and inflation came down, and they were extremely popular. We could talk more about it, and yeah, Paco could also, I'm actually mostly like, I'm just talk a lot, but they're really the ones that know more will be Sebastian and Paco.
Paco, do you want to chime in on this one, or?
No, I agree. I tend to understand what is the logic of what could happen, but often, in those plans, the thing that people are worried about is about relative prices, giving too much incentive for consumptions, because and countries having trade account deficits as a result of that, either because exchange rate is stabilized very quickly, maybe domestic prices are going down, the inflation, but not as fast, and maybe the economy become less competitive. But consumption is booming because of price. Relative prices are moving in their favor. So doesn't need to be, I agree with Fernando, recessionary. I guess what the problem with the currency war was the long-term stability of it, and the lack of flexibility to shock. That's what people would be more worried about that. So that doesn't mean that there will be particular sectors that may be happy about fiscal adjustments, and that a lot of the political savviness of the government will be about how to manage that. And also, I guess, going back to the discussion on whether we'll be able to get a coalition, be supporting Congress or not, I will see that search for support as the natural way through which the political system will manage the distribution and impact of reforms. It's not a bad thing that that some negotiation is happening, to the extent that some sector is losing particularly a lot by some reforms than other sectors. That's part of why we have a political system, is just to manage those distributional impacts. And what you will want that to happen is will be fiscal reforms that are persistent, and those fiscal reforms will impact some sectors. They will be naturally expect a lot some conflict, and the question is how the Milei government will be able to manage that conflict in a successful fashion, and how much the political system is able to manage the impact of those reforms. There doesn't need to be impact in the aggregate, as Fernando was saying. It will be more but I will see them as more sectoral distributional impacts. They will be there and are an important part of politics deal with that. That happened in the US through the rise in import from China, and that has a lot of distributional impact across space. And one might say that part of the results in US elections in the recent times was reflecting some of those impacts. But that was.
So one thing Sebastián, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just this all started by the question of whether the path that he has is fragile, and the answer is yes. And it's always fragile in Argentina. You always inherit a very bad situation, and you have a very short time to get a path that led you to win the midterm and then succeed. But I agree totally with Fernando and Paco. If he achieve it, then he will get a lot of support. And indeed, when we pass many of the reforms in the tax reform, the fiscal responsibility law, the formula of the pensioner, was because Macri won the midterm election. Not only he won, he defeated with his candidate in the province of Buenos Aires, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. And that was key. That was key. So what the whole political system saw at that moment was, okay, there's Macri for the next 6 years. Now we need to negotiate with him. He has the power. Then there was the sudden stop, the crisis, and things changed. But that was an exposed fact, right? No one anticipated at the moment they were bargaining the loss. So that's what I say. You know, there is the next 3-4 months is to reaccommodate the prices, and also to see where you're going to get the reserves to fix the exchange rate, because that's not there. And there, I think also, maybe we should talk about this. Yesterday, I was shocked by the announce of the new foreign policy minister, Diana Mondino, where she said, we will sign our process to start entering the OECD tomorrow. Under Macri, we worked really hard all the time I was there. I went to Paris a couple of times. Not that it's not nice to go to Paris, but you know, we couldn't get in because Brazil was a candidate. This is important. See how the world works. Brazil was a candidate. We were a candidate. Europe didn't have 2 potable candidates. So they say, no, we need one from Latin America and one from Europe, or 2 from Europe, but they couldn't find a second in Europe. So no one was invited. Now Brazil is not a candidate because Lula is an ally of Putin. And Milei went to meet with the Secretary of State in the US, and he said, I am pro-Israel, pro-United States. That's all I am. And we are invited. I know maybe I'm simplifying a bit, but you know, these geopolitics things are important, and there is a new team. They have to go to Washington. They have to sit with the IMF. Not all the credit of the IMF was used. They can sort of renegotiate a new one where that extra money comes in, plus the fact they have to play this card that at the end, we took a credit with the IMF at a negative interest rate. So in real terms, the debt went down. So there has to be a scope for increasing the amount, and that will be only possible if we have a consistent plan, if they see that we have a consistent plan. But you have to put all the pieces together, and that goes back to what Fernando was saying. There's a lot of technical things to put together, but it could work. I don't want to be totally optimistic. We're talking about Argentina, right? Things could go wrong, things are fragile. We're not neglecting that, but let me put it in this way. I think it's more interesting of talking about what could go well, because that will be, well, first, what we want, but second, because that will be the novelty, right? Things not going well, you know, we know how that happened. You cannot make the adjustment. The market doesn't believe you. They run from the pesos, they run from the debt in pesos, and inflation goes up instead of going down, and that's it. But we hope that that's not the case, that they can put the pieces together.
So Sebastian alluded to the international arena, and I think that's an important question to also be looking at, right? And this is where, I mean, I wonder the degree to which Milei's ideological affiliations would be a confounding factor. So yesterday, I think everybody noticed, everybody commented on the fact that Bolsonaro was there. Brazil is our main trading partner, but Lula was not there. Not only are they political opponents, you know, one could make the argument that Bolsonaro kind of led the charge for a coup against Lula. So independent of what we might think politically of this, from a geopolitical and geoeconomic standpoint, this seems not to be pragmatic. On the other hand, as Sebastian mentioned, Milei went to the US and met with the Biden administration, very highly placed people, and he didn't go to Mar-a-Lago, despite the fact that he has been endorsed by Trump and has very close connection with the MAGA world. So I'm curious what you think Argentina's international strategy should look like in order to actually help the situation that it faces. And it has a lot to do with, for example, getting more leverage over the IMF, but perhaps also getting fresh funds from elsewhere.
So I just want to, I mean, just to take out the pressure from Sebastian that was there during the negotiations. So you should remember, I mean, all the Argentines, you should remember that Macri administration, probably not wisely, closely, because of his close relationship with Obama personally, and with the administration, very publicly backed Obama during the, very publicly about, no, sorry, not Obama, because of his close relation with Obama, very publicly back during the elections, which something shouldn't have done. It should have been like, you know, basically a neutral, being the president of a country. And then there was a bit, oops, what's going to happen? And just by chance, because he knew Trump from his dad businesses, then he got very close to Trump, and that was instrumental for the secretary, for basically the U.S. helping Argentina a lot. I think this is not a secret. There are books written about it. So, but I want to say so that Sebastian doesn't have to say it, or doesn't have to make an opinion on it. But you know, sort of, Brazil is a very important partner, and Diana Mondino has said very clearly that we should try to have more trade with Brazil. But there are, you know, more important actors in the world, and you know, sort of, it's ridiculous that Argentina has, just before the invasion in Russia, I had to remind you that our ex-president, went to Russia to say that Argentina will be the entry door from Russia into the region. So this is where this sort of realignment, we had to be, it's not that this is a realignment from a neutral government. You know, we were, you know, as pro-Putin as you could be. I mean, you know, from a country that has no particular interest or relationship. And, you know, this is a big difference. So, and also there's a kind of like, I'm just not talking about sort of, I mean, I think from Milei is purely ideological, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the, you know, the importance of different partners. So I think that's, you know, I think with Macri, we were lucky at the end, but for like, you know, for reasons that are, you know, really coincidences, even though he has a fantastic team. And I think with Milei, for a bit from luck, from his ideological alignment, a bit from luck, I'm also appointing a very good person. I think Diana Mondino is the most moderate and more sort of reasonable from the entire party that he has. So I think I'm hoping that they're gonna continue to be lucky, just for really sheer luck of having a reasonable geopolitical sort of guidance. But I'm sure that this is very controversial, what I said. So.
Well, also, Zelensky was there in Buenos Aires. I mean, I happen to follow the Ukrainian conflict very, very closely, and I was very much upset about the Argentine government support of Putin during the invasion ambiguity. But the fact that Zelensky flew to Buenos Aires yesterday is a statement. Another point I want to make is, if I think of for non-Argentinian people in the audience, if I think of putting together in a one-dimensional axis from left to right politicians in the US and in Argentina, and having a distribution of political positions, I will think of the distribution of Argentina will be a large left shift of the distribution, where the right, not the extreme right tail, but the right tail of the Argentine distribution of politicians will be not far away from the median Democrat in the US in terms of a lot of policies, for sure economic policies. So I think it's it will be incorrect to compare Milei with Trump, even though he himself allies, and the way I see that is a lot of a little bit of a statement to his own base. Look, this is a guy, a radical person in the US. Let me associate me to him. But I see more of a superficial statement, that statement of policy. And it's not surprising that Milei was very comfortable when he visited the US right after the election. I will see that he will have a very natural conversation with the Biden administration in many ways. But that's, I guess, my personal view on that.
So if I can add something, and maybe my co-panelists can help me understand this. One thing that stands out about Milei, I was trying to look at some data on this, is when you look at people like Trump or people like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, there's a clear gradient in terms of the age of their supporters. These people tend to do better with older voters. And if you look at other countries in Latin America, like Gabriel Boric in Chile, or recently Gustavo Petro in Colombia, these guys tend to do better with younger voters. So you start to see a pattern where the right-wing populist, to give it a name, is favored by older people, while the more left-wing progressive candidate is favored by the young. There could be many explanations for this. It could be the old Winston Churchill adage that, if you're young and not left-wing, you don't have a heart, that type of thing. It could be that the left has been better at embracing things like climate change and environmental conservation and cultural issues that the young care about. Something that's striking about Milei is that he breaks that mold. That actually, if you look at the data, he, especially voters under 24, he beat Massa by like 20 points. It's a landslide victory. And so then that leaves me thinking, okay, so this guy, at the first glance, and maybe this is what Paco was hinting at, you put him like on the Trump-Bolsonaro mold. But then when you look at what is his core constituency, you start to see this sharp discrepancy, which, again, going back to like the political vulnerability of his movement, and Sebastian mentioned earlier how how Milei had been very successful with like the TikTok generation. And so maybe a lot of this is that politics nowadays, especially with young people, is dominated by social media, and he was very good at playing that game. But then you also start to wonder, you know, Paco was trying to draw this picture of what the distribution of voters looks like. Okay, if your core constituency are these 20, 22-year-olds, you know, how do the policies that you implement map into sustained support? Or is it like you do the adjustment and then the older people realize that you're not crazy and then your support base shifts over time? I don't know, but I just wanted to point that out as a key distinction relative to Trump, Bolsonaro, and so on.
So I wonder if someone want to comment or dare to translate to English how people from the Milei party will refer like people to me or Sebastián, I think even Paco. But I will not say it. I will let Paco or Sebastián to explain how they refer to our age cohort. Again, I'm actually guessing that both Paco and Sebastián voted in the runoff for Milei, but maybe one of you wants to explain how we were referred to from the, you know, there's not
we will be all peace, but not as peace as in angry.
Yeah,
that would be the word.
We were the incontinent old people, but
people.
in a less flattering way.
Yeah.
So their voters are very different from the traditional voters of center right or maybe center party, just as Luis very clearly explained. And I have heard some political scientists in Argentina. I don't have the ability to judge whether this is a good explanation or not, but saying two things related to it. One is the effect of the policies during COVID, because Argentina was one of the most restrictive countries. And then the idea is really very restricted and very badly implemented, in my opinion. So because of that, I think that a lot of young people, the political scientists that I heard, they say that this idea, and Milei, not only Milei, but among them, maybe the idea of his ideas kind of resonated more. That's one of the things that I heard. And the other thing that I heard is that we come from 20 years of where the young people were in the party from Cristina Fernandez. That was what it used to be kind of the transgressive, but now is the norm. That's just basically they have these groups of they used to be young people. They are kind of old people and very much like, in the casta, as you were saying. And instead, Milei is a bit more of the fresh ideas. I don't have the ability to evaluate this one. I'm just saying because, that's what some of the political scientists are saying.
If I can add something speculative, of course, being an economist, but I think what happened is you can think always about the left or right, about the different dimensions, right? And let's simplify. I said there is the identitary issues like abortion, human rights, and the Kirchner exploited that agenda, and to some extent they achieve everything, and still the economy was a disaster, right? So when you think about the left in the US, you think maybe that some policies you don't think are pro-growth, but the economy doesn't get a disaster. It stopped growing and sustainable 300% inflation. So they achieved the identitary issues they cared 20 years ago. And then they go to a point where after 20 years of no growth, and even as Paco showed, 50 years of lagging behind the war, I mean, they wanted a change, and Milei offered that change, came up with new identitary issues, and also with this promise that liberalism and freedom is what's going to make us grow and recover from all this economic ostracism, and also brought some new identitary issues. we don't know, as was said before, how much of the identity issues have a large support, because at the end, in the first in the election, he got 30% of the vote. He got a lot among the young, but he got 30% of the vote. Then the candidate Patricia Bullrich, that from the Macri coalition, that had a support among the old people like Fernando and I, got 24%, and that is the 55% he got in the second round. And so it's that coalition that now has to govern and find an equilibrium. And that's the challenge, basically.
Can I briefly try to ask also maybe the other panelists to answer to Luis' question there? I thought that maybe particularly Sebastián, because I think Sebastián knows him very well. There's a fantastic book. Oh, sorry, I don't know if everybody has access to looking at. There's a question about kind of economists and politicians, and is it the economists that are screwing up? Is it politicians that are not listening? Is it both? You know, how do you think about this? There's a very good, I think, him as a very good sociologist and political scientist in Universidad de Itela that wrote what I thought was a fantastic book, and which is called, I think, well, I don't know how to say it, how to do a good translation in English, but in fact, I don't know if it has been translated in English. You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Torres book?
Yes. Yes. Has it been translated in English?
No.
We should say the title. So the
Fifth
title
floor,
is
no.
Diario de una temporada en el quinto piso.
Exactly. Journal of a season on the fifth floor, which is where the economic ministry is, something like that, yeah. Or notes, something like that.
And I think this is a very good book because he's not an economist. He's I think he's a sociologist, but he's really more like a political scientist, I think, in terms of his writing. And he was part of the government from Alfonsín. And they were like in a sorry, I shouldn't say weird, but you know, like a small part of the cabinet that then they took over when this stabilization plan. And what is fantastic of his book is this is a diary that he said didn't edit of what he was thinking and where are all the political conversations at the time. He writes, I think, extremely well. I'm so jealous looking at how he writes how he's writes to his sister or something. But the point, I believe, or, Paco and Sebastián, you should tell me whether, I'm sure you guys have read it. So it's fantastic to see how tough it is, the communication between economists and politicians and the different trade-offs. But I'm not sure if that will answer it, but I think it will be a very good resource for that.
Yeah, maybe just add only that I have a cycle of conversations with people in my YouTube channel, and I have one entirely about that book with Juan Carlos Torre, where I challenged him a lot, and he had good answers. But if you want to watch it, you can find it there. But yeah, it's tough. Going back to more substantial question, it's tough because I think there's two dimensions of that. One is that at some point politicians have urgencies, and you can rationalize the difference of time horizon, right? And sometimes their time horizons are very, very short. And the other is because economy, sometimes we disagree, right? Not everyone was in agreement with floating or with whatever, or the fiscal gradualism or whatever. So that also introduced noise, because you can always be, oh no, but I talked to these other economists and start to play the economists one against the other. And sometimes, you have to, I had the view when some things were not optimal and people wanted to change it within Macri government, my view was, and I expressed it, look, the remedy is going to be worse than the illness, and we are here and we have to stick to this. Unfortunately, I didn't want.
I thought I think that we could. This is a good time to wrap up. Laura, do you want to say something to close?
Yeah, so yeah, I think we're getting to the end of the panel. We do still have a few questions from the audience. I don't know if we want to touch on those quickly. We have a few questions on the LELIQs, the central bank debt, and the independence of the central bank, and if that has been an issue. If someone would like to take on that really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the LELIQ is a tough call because as I say at the beginning, on the one hand, they could, be a source of
Sebastian, sorry to interrupt. Why don't you very, very briefly explain what they are?
Yeah, okay. So the central bank issue its own debt denominated in pesos that pays interest, but under financial repression, under the Kirchner, the real interest rate was 0 or negative. So autonomously, they don't grow in real terms. However, because the central bank also finances the treasury, prints pesos, and sometimes also absorb them by issuing more LELIQs. So you may see growth, but it was driven more for the fiscal deficit. Now, it doesn't matter how you got there. You have that. Are a problem in the balance sheet of the central bank, because if you want to say the central bank is not going to print money and they have to pay the interest, even if the interests are not positive, they still have to print. But if the interest rate became positive, well, they became a source of growth of the real amount of money on itself. Now, how can you solve it, right? Because if you have to think that who is buying those LELIQs? And those LELIQs are being bought by the private banks. So why they bought those? Because, well, they have deposits from the families. The deposits in a high inflation economy are short-term deposits, maybe 30 days. And so they were buying these LELIQs that also has a maturity mostly of 30 days. So the central bank sort of can regulate how much the bank should have of them. So there was not a large risk of a run against these LELIQs, as long as there's no a run from the deposit. So the solution seems to be that the treasury is gonna take that debt and issue debt also in pesos, but with a larger maturity. That seems to be the big thing, that now instead of having to renew the LELIQs every 30 days, we will have a maturity of a year or whatever, okay? There are some technical issues like the default risk, but putting all that aside, the thing is that it's not that clear that you gain maturity, because if there is a run against the deposit, you still have to provide liquidity to the banks. So you will still have to print money or buy the titles of the public sector one way or another, because the public sector will have a put for these titles. So I think it was discussed. It started as a great idea, and now most economists have said something similar to what I say. I believe so. It's not entirely clear what the government is thinking right now. However, in that month of discussions, most of the holders of the LELIQs moved to something called passes, which is overnight deposits at the central bank. So now they are a much urgent problem, but it was all self-inflicted, I will say. And so, yeah, we'll see what they announce tomorrow. I don't know, but it's an issue right now.
All right, thank you so much for answering those questions from the audience. And yeah, I would like to thank you all so much for being here. And I think this was a really informative and great discussion. And I will be sending the links for our co-sponsors, so the Chicago Center on Democracy, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Stigler Center, all at the University of Chicago. We all have different links to our newsletters, so if the audience would like to sign up to those, and we're always hosting different events with panelists, professors, faculty. So yeah, please keep those in mind. And yeah, if anyone would like to say any last words, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for organizing. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. A pleasure to meet you all. I learned a lot. Look forward to seeing you some more time.
All right. Thank you all so much. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
No.